I never thought silence could be so loud. That's the thing nobody tells you about those moments that change everything. They're not always filled with words or grand gestures. Sometimes they're just you, standing in your shared apartment kitchen at 2 in the morning, wearing nothing but boxer briefs, and your supposedly straight roommate pretending not to notice the very obvious situation happening below your waistline. Let me back up. My name is Adrian, and 6 months ago, I moved into a 2-bedroom apartment with a guy named Miles I found through a university housing board. Miles was everything I wasn't. Confident without being arrogant, athletic without being a gym bro, and so casually comfortable in his own skin that it was almost annoying. He had this messy, dark hair that he was always running his hands through, and these green eyes that seemed to actually listen when you talked, not just wait for their turn to speak. Also, he was straight. Very straight. At least that's what I kept telling myself every time I caught myself staring a little too long. I'd known I was gay since high school, but I'd gotten really good at the whole low-key thing. I wasn't closeted exactly. My close friends knew. My family knew. But I also wasn't the type to announce it to every new person I met. With Miles, I'd mentioned it casually during our first week living together, just dropped it into conversation like it was no big deal. Yeah, my ex-boyfriend used to make the best carbonara, I'd said while we were figuring out the kitchen situation. Miles had just nodded, asked if I could teach him the recipe, and that was that. No weird energy, no awkward questions, just easy acceptance. It made living with him comfortable. Maybe too comfortable. The thing about living with someone is that you see them in all these unguarded moments. Miles would wander around shirtless after his morning runs, sweat still glistening on his shoulders. He'd stretch in the living room after workouts, his shirt riding up to show the definition of his stomach. He'd lean over the kitchen counter in those grey sweatpants that should honestly be illegal, completely oblivious to the effect he was having on me. And I'd pretend to be deeply interested in my phone or my textbook or literally anything else, because he was my roommate, and he was straight, and I wasn't about to make things weird. But then there were these other moments, small things that I probably read too much into. The way he'd touch my shoulder when he passed behind me in the kitchen. How he'd always save me a seat when his friends came over, making sure I was included in conversations. The night he came home drunk from a party and insisted on telling me in great detail how much he appreciated having me as a roommate, because I actually gave a shit about people. The morning I'd been stressed about finals and he'd made me breakfast without being asked. Then sat with me while I ate it. Just talking about nothing important until I felt calmer. I'd started having these thoughts I knew I shouldn't have. Lying in bed at night. Hearing him moving around in his room on the other side of the wall and wondering what would happen if things were different. If he looked at me the way I caught myself looking at him. I felt like I was back in high school, nursing a hopeless crush on someone completely unavailable. Except worse, because I had to see him every single day and act normal about it. The night everything changed started out completely ordinary. It was a Friday in late October, cold enough that we'd started using the heat. Miles had been out with some friends from his engineering program, and I'd stayed in, trying to work on a paper that was due Monday. Around midnight, I'd given up and decided to watch something mindless on Netflix. I was 3 episodes into a show I wasn't really paying attention to when I heard Miles's key in the lock. He came in looking tired but happy, that slightly flushed look he got when he'd been laughing a lot. "Hey," he said, dropping his jacket on the chair. "You're still up?" "Couldn't sleep," I said, which was true. I'd been thinking about him all night, actually, but I obviously wasn't going to say that. "How was it?" "Good." Loud. "I think I'm getting too old for college bars." He was 23, only a year older than me, but he'd taken a gap year before starting university. "Mind if I join you?" My heart did this stupid little jump thing it had started doing whenever he was around. "Sure. It's nothing good, though." He settled onto the couch next to me, closer than he needed to be given how much space we had. I could smell his cologne mixed with beer and the cold night air. We sat there watching the show, and I was hyper-aware of every point where our bodies almost touched. His arm along the back of the couch, not quite around my shoulders, but close enough that I could feel the warmth of it. His thigh a few inches from mine. The way he'd shift his weight, and the couch would move, bringing us incrementally closer. "Can I ask you something?" Miles said during a commercial break. His voice had this serious quality that made me nervous. "Yeah, of course." "What's it like?" "Being gay, I mean." He said it carefully, like he was worried about asking wrong. I realized I've never actually asked you about it, like, really asked. And we've been living together for 6 months. I didn't know what I'd expected, but it wasn't that. "What do you want to know?" He thought for a moment. "I guess, how did you know? Like, was there a specific moment, or was it just always there?" I should have deflected, should have given him some generic answer and changed the subject. Instead, I found myself being honest. Both, kind of. I think part of me always knew, but I didn't have words for it when I was younger. The moment I really knew was freshman year of high school. There was this guy in my English class, and one day he gave this presentation, and I couldn't stop watching him. Not the presentation, just him. The way he moved his hands when he talked. The way he smiled when he made a joke. And I realized I wasn't just admiring him or wanting to be friends. I wanted to know what it would be like to kiss him. Miles was quiet, listening in that intense way he had. "Did you?" "Did I what?" "Kiss him." I laughed. God, no. He was straight and popular and way out of my league. I just pined from a distance like a tragic Victorian heroine. "I bet you weren't as obvious as you think you were," Miles said. There was something in his voice I couldn't quite read. "You're good at hiding what you're feeling." That felt pointed somehow, but I didn't know what to do with it. "It's a survival skill." "You shouldn't have to hide," he said quietly. "Not here. Not with me." The show had come back on, but neither of us was watching it anymore. We were just sitting there in the flickering light of the TV, and the air between us felt charged with something I was afraid to name. Miles was looking at me with this expression I'd never seen before, vulnerable and searching, like he was trying to figure something out. "Miles," I started, but I didn't know how to finish the sentence. "I think about you a lot," he said suddenly. "Is that weird?" "I mean, we're roommates. So obviously I think about you in like a practical sense. But that's not what I mean. I think about you when you're not here. Wonder what you're doing, if you're having a good day. I look forward to coming home because you'll be here. I've started doing things just because I think you'll like them, or because they'll make you smile." My heart was pounding so hard, I was sure he could hear it. "That's not weird," I managed. That's what friends do." "Right. Friends." He said it like he was testing the word. "Except, I don't do this with my other friends. I don't notice what they smell like, or pay attention to what makes them laugh. I don't get this thing in my chest when they're around, like everything's a little bit better just because they're in the room." I couldn't breathe. This wasn't happening. This was one of those dreams I'd been having, and I was going to wake up any second feeling embarrassed and frustrated. "What are you saying?" "I don't know," Miles said, and he sounded almost frustrated. "That's the problem. I've spent my whole life thinking I was straight. Never questioned it. Never had a reason to. And then you moved in, and everything got complicated." "Miles, I'm not trying to make this weird," he said quickly. I needed to say it out loud. I needed you to know that whatever this is I'm feeling, it's real. Even if I don't completely understand it yet." We stayed up until 4 in the morning talking. Miles told me about how he'd been feeling confused for months, noticing things about me and about his own reactions that didn't fit with what he thought he knew about himself. How he'd tried to convince himself it was just really intense friendship. But that explanation was getting harder to believe. How he'd been terrified to say anything because he didn't want to lose me as a friend or make our living situation unbearable. I told him things I'd never said out loud to anyone. How I'd been attracted to him almost from the start but had buried it deep because I thought it was hopeless. How living with him had been this special kind of torture, wanting something I was sure I couldn't have. How many nights I'd lain awake thinking about him in the next room, imagining what it would be like if things were different. They could be different, Miles said as the sun started to come up. If you wanted. If you're willing to be patient with me while I figure this out. I've gotten pretty good at patience, I said, and he smiled in a way that made my chest ache. We didn't kiss that night. Didn't even really touch beyond the way we'd been sitting close on the couch. But something fundamental had shifted between us. Like we'd opened a door we couldn't close again. We went to bed as the apartment filled with morning light. And I lay there, feeling like my entire world had tilted on its axis. The next few weeks were strange and wonderful and terrifying all at once. Miles and I started spending even more time together. But now there was this awareness underlying everything. We'd watch movies with barely any space between us on the couch. He'd find excuses to touch me, a hand on my back, fingers brushing when we passed things to each other, sitting close enough at dinner that our knees touched under the table. We talked about everything, staying up late sharing the kinds of stories and secrets you only tell people you trust completely. But we still hadn't kissed. Hadn't really done anything beyond this intense, charged togetherness. I could tell Miles was working through something, giving himself permission to want what he wanted. I didn't push, even though the anticipation was killing me. This was too important to rush. Then came the night that inspired this whole story. The night I realized that sometimes the most meaningful moments are the ones where nothing actually happens. I'd gone to bed around midnight, but I couldn't sleep. It was one of those nights where your brain won't shut off. Just keeps cycling through thoughts and feelings until you're exhausted, but wired. Around 2, I gave up and decided to get some water. I didn't bother putting on more clothes. Miles and I had gotten comfortable with each other, and it was just boxer briefs, nothing he hadn't seen before. I was standing at the sink, drinking water and looking out the window at the quiet street below, when I heard Miles's door open. He came into the kitchen wearing just sleep pants, his hair messy from sleep, rubbing his eyes. "Couldn't sleep either," he said. "Brain won't shut up," I said, turning to face him. That's when it happened. Or rather, when it didn't happen. I'd been thinking about Miles for hours before I got out of bed, and my body had responded in a way that was pretty obvious in just boxer briefs. I realized it the second I turned around and saw Miles's eyes drop, widen slightly, then quickly move back to my face. Neither of us said anything. He didn't make a joke, didn't look uncomfortable, didn't pretend he hadn't seen. He just looked at me with this intense, unreadable expression. The silence stretched out. I should have felt embarrassed, should have made some excuse and fled back to my room. But something about the way Miles was looking at me, not disgusted, not uncomfortable, but almost hungry, kept me frozen in place. The air between us felt electric, heavy with everything we hadn't said and hadn't done. "Adrian," Miles said quietly. Just my name. But the way he said it made my skin feel too tight. "Yeah?" He crossed the kitchen slowly, deliberately, until he was standing right in front of me, close enough that I could feel the heat coming off his skin. His eyes searched my face like he was memorizing it. "I think I've figured it out," he said. "What I'm feeling. What I want." "What do you want?" I barely recognized my own voice. Instead of answering, Miles reached up and touched my face, fingers gentle against my jaw. His thumb traced along my cheekbone, and I stopped breathing. We stood there like that, his hand on my face, my heart pounding, both of us balanced on the edge of something. "Is this okay?" he whispered. I nodded, not trusting myself to speak. Miles leaned in slowly, giving me every chance to pull away. When his lips touched mine, it was soft and tentative and perfect. The kiss was brief, just a few seconds of warmth and possibility, but it felt like everything shifting into place. When he pulled back, he was smiling. "I've wanted to do that for weeks," he said. "I've wanted you to do that for months," I admitted. He laughed, and the sound was bright and relieved. Then he kissed me again. Less tentative this time. His hands moved to my waist, pulling me closer, and I wrapped my arms around his neck. We stood there in the kitchen, kissing like we'd been doing it forever. Like we'd invented it just now. Like nothing else in the world mattered. When we finally broke apart, we were both breathing hard. Miles pressed his forehead against mine. "So that's what I've been missing," he said. "No wonder everyone makes such a big deal about this." "That's not just kissing in general," I said. "That's kissing someone you have feelings for." "That's kissing you," he corrected. "Specifically you." We didn't sleep that night. We moved to the couch and spent hours just talking and kissing and exploring this new dimension of our relationship. Miles told me he'd been terrified that if he kissed me and it felt wrong, he'd lose me completely. That he'd needed to be sure before he took that step. And now that he had, he couldn't believe he'd waited so long. "That moment in the kitchen," he said as the sun came up for the second time since we'd started this. "When you turned around and I knew you were attracted to me. But seeing it like that, seeing physical proof that I affected you that way, something just clicked. I stopped being scared and started being honest with myself about what I wanted." "So you're saying my poorly timed erection is what finally got us together?" I said, laughing. "I'm saying everything about you gets to me," Miles said seriously. "The way you think, the way you talk, the way you look at me like I'm someone worth looking at. And yes, the way your body responds to me. All of it. I want all of it." That was 7 months ago. Miles and I have been together ever since, navigating this relationship that started as friendship and became something deeper. It hasn't always been easy. Miles has had to work through a lot of internalized assumptions about himself, and we've both had to figure out how to be roommates and partners at the same time. His friends and family have been mostly supportive, though it took his parents some time to adjust. My friends think we're disgustingly cute together, and they're probably right. We're still in the same apartment, but we've rearranged things. One bedroom is now an office and guest room. We share the other one, share a bed, share our lives in ways I never thought possible when I first moved in. Miles leaves his clothes on my floor and steals my hoodies and kisses me goodbye every morning before his early classes. We cook dinner together and fight over what to watch and fall asleep, tangled together on the couch. Sometimes I think about that night in the kitchen, standing there in my underwear, while Miles pretended not to notice I was hard. How that moment of vulnerability and silence led to everything we have now. How the things we don't say can be just as powerful as the things we do. How love sometimes announces itself not with grand gestures, but with quiet recognition, with someone seeing all of you and choosing to step closer instead of away. Miles says he knew for sure in that moment that seeing me exposed and vulnerable and wanting made something in him finally admit what he'd been feeling all along. He says he looked at me and thought, yes, this, him, always, and everything else just fell away. I knew long before that, if I'm honest. I knew the first time Miles made me coffee without asking how I took it, because he'd been paying attention. I knew when he texted me in the middle of his day just to share something funny. I knew every time he looked at me like I was someone worth seeing. But that moment in the kitchen was when we both knew, together, when the silence between us became a conversation, when not saying anything said everything, when my body betrayed what my mouth had been too scared to say, and Miles responded not with words, but with understanding, with acceptance, with his own unspoken truth. People always ask me how we got together, and I never quite know what to say. The real story is too intimate, too specific to us. So I usually just smile and say something vague about being roommates who became something more. But the truth is more complicated and more beautiful than that. The truth is that love found us in a moment of silence, in the space between noticing and acknowledging, in the courage it takes to be vulnerable with someone who might not feel the same way. The truth is that sometimes the most important thing someone can do is see you, really see you, in all your messy, complicated, wanting humanity, and not look away. Miles saw me that night in the kitchen, saw what I was feeling and wanting, and instead of making it weird or uncomfortable or wrong, he let himself finally see his own feelings too. He let that moment of my vulnerability become a moment of mutual honesty. Now we're here, building something real together. It's not always perfect. We argue about dishes and whose turn it is to buy groceries and whether we're watching too much TV. But it's ours. It's real. It's this beautiful, complicated thing that grew out of friendship and want and the courage to be honest about our feelings. Sometimes late at night, when we're lying in bed together, Miles will trace patterns on my skin and tell me he's glad I had insomnia that night, that he's glad he got up for water too, that he's glad for every small choice that led us to each other. And I tell him I'd do it all again, every moment of uncertainty and longing, because it brought us here. The thing nobody tells you about finding love is that it's not always dramatic. Sometimes it's quiet. Sometimes it's just two people in a kitchen at 2 a.m, seeing each other clearly for the first time. Sometimes it's the courage to not say anything, to let the moment speak for itself. Sometimes it's someone noticing you're hard and not looking away, not making it shameful, just acknowledging it as part of the truth between you. That's what Miles gave me that night. Permission to be seen, to be wanted, to take up space in his life and his heart. And I gave him permission to want what he wanted, to let himself feel what he was feeling, to stop fighting against something that was always meant to happen. We joke about it now, about how our whole relationship pivoted on that one awkward moment. But it's not really a joke. That moment mattered. The silence mattered. The seeing and being seen mattered. All of it brought us here, to this life we're building together, to this love that started with friendship and grew into something neither of us expected, but both of us needed. So yeah, my straight roommate noticed I was hard and didn't say anything. And that silence, that acknowledgement, that moment of pure honesty between us, that's when everything changed. That's when we both stopped pretending and started being real with each other. That's when our story really began.